Thanks, friends, for joining us today, and a Happy New Year. And for those that are Curb Your Enthusiasm fans, you know I have clearly exceeded the bounds for that greeting, but we do hope that the beginning of your year has started off great. Quickly, thanks, Steve, Chris, and Tom for joining today. Looking forward to the discussion, but quickly, let's take a look back at 2025, the year that was. And Steve, you must be our resident Nostradamus because you so boldly predicted that AI would permeate every discussion, tools, technologies, and be at the forefront of what security analysts use. It did cause some disruption, right, from an industry perspective, and would love to hear from the group here on really what was the reality of AI and how it was good and how it was bad, and then we'll get started on 2026.
Yeah, let me jump on that one. I took the very bold position of saying AI would probably be a big topic in 2025. So not really rocket science there in that one. But I think as we go back and look at that prediction and where this year went, I see really kind of two things that jump out. And Chris and Tom, I'd love to hear if you agree or disagree. When we talk about like AI being everywhere, that was definitely true. What I think is really interesting, though, and again, we touched on in that prediction, is AI is being mentioned either in places where it actually was not involved, or it's being mentioned in ways that it's not really manifesting that way on the wire. So we have a number of geopolitical events and even scandals, and it's like, well, that's AI. Like, that's now the default, like, almost get it out of jail free card. AI did that, and that really has permeated the whole kind of global ecosystem. And then we are definitely seeing attackers use AI. However, we're seeing more discussion about what attackers may be doing with AI. And there's a very real delta there. And I think that delta, and then again, that application for places where AI may or may not be involved, we really saw that come through.
Yeah, I completely agree. And thanks, Mel and Steve, for the intro. I think, from my perspective, that delta in terms of how AI is actually being used was a little bit less, more underwhelming than I think everyone's kind of hoping for at this time last year. In a weird way, it's become such like a key operational tool for like actors that we track, where they use it for reconnaissance or for improving phishing lures and so forth. And to Steve's point, it hasn't been like the foundational like threat, like the AI malware just took down the power grid or whatever. It's assisting to make them more efficient in targeting and increase the scope at what certain actors can do, and improve like their capabilities slightly. But overall, it's been a little bit more underwhelming on the attacker side, I would say.
Yeah, much more on the operational side of things, boosting them there. What they can get through, data they steal, being able to process that faster. Like Tom said, on the recon and like prepping for attack side, but not so much like a full-on AI, attack.
Yeah, and to that point even more, I think like the more interesting examples of this, if for anybody that's not familiar, really stretches into like not just like what you'd think of like basic reconnaissance for like an attack. What we saw in practice multiple times throughout the year was LLMs being used to identify targets and identify the reasoning behind certain targets. If you want to identify if a certain actor is interested in certain size organizations that work in certain industries that are based in certain locations, LLMs have been phenomenal in being able to support that operational support at that point. So yeah, that's kind of where we've been leaning from our perspective. And obviously it depends completely on the tool, the LLM that's being used, and the different AI tools for certain capabilities. But yeah, it's kind of how I'm looking at it there, Steve.
And there's still a lot of like hype and sensationalism, right, that comes with just AI as a term in general that I think is either a conduit to finding a benefit for it or can be discouraging, right, for enterprise and organizations, trying to use it in lieu of other tools and technology or even people, right? Like over the past decade, we've desperately tried to fill the talent gap in our industry and really zoning in on cyber, right? There's a lot of open recs out there, but clearly we can't hire at scale, right, to keep up with the bad guys, those threat actors. They are obviously infiltrating our organizations too. Going back to Steve, some of the work that we covered from a North Korea perspective, shout out to our friends at Risky Business for helping us with that. But how do you see AI helping fill those roles? And is that a near-term thing? Is that going to be something that scales? Or is it part of the hype?
Yeah, so let me jump on that one again first and kind of give another two-part answer. So I think on the workforce side, I don't think it's hype. I do think it's still a little misunderstood. And to be specific, there's a lot of meaningful concern about, okay, AI's here, it's replacing jobs. And I think that's a genuine, valid discussion to be had. In our experience, and I can only speak to what we're doing here at SentinelOne, but as we talk to our peers across the industry, we're hearing very similar things. We're not replacing manpower with it. We're actually doing is letting that manpower focus on much more meaningful work. So that's not trying to get too cute there, but that's a really meaningful discussion. And what that's really driving with us comes down to we're having to recalibrate how we think about our workforce. And two examples I would give off the top. One, our people are just advancing quicker. They're not having to spend as many time doing as many reps because things are manual. AI is really good at that. And so people can progress and learn because they're working the hard, challenging things that push them forward. And then the other piece of it is, I think a lot of the things that we looked for as an industry as key delineators, like, oh, this person could write in 4 types of code. I don't think that matters anymore, or at least not as much. What matters even more is the fundamentals. For us, it's much more important that someone understands the basic tradecraft, because if they can understand it, networking as an example, and they can't write in 4 code languages, that's fine. AI can actually do that pretty well. So it's actually, I think, really reinforced a return to you've got to have the core fundamentals, because you have to move across the technology sphere so quickly that you need to understand how that works. And then to your earlier part of that question around like the North Korea mention, I think North Korea is the best example of how AI can really advance your workforce in a malicious way. And Tom in particular has got some great research out on this. But I think when we talk about the IT workers that we've been discussing for almost 3 years now with North Korea, the biggest takeaway is that would not happen without AI. That entire scope of activity does not exist without AI. So if North Korea can put thousands of people to work doing actual IT jobs by leveraging AI, I think there's a real industry lesson there for us as well.
Yeah, and to not change subject away from North Korea yet, because I love talking about North Korea, definitely recommend everybody check out the blog we just released. I think it was like 2 days ago at this point. Our colleague Phil in Labs here has a blog on the Sentinel Labs side of the house that details kind of how we look at the differences between like AI, ML, and kind of explains kind of the new threat landscape that LLMs and AI in general kind of present to us. So great intro to kind of catch up with this if you feel a little bit behind. But yeah, me in particular, in terms of researching actors, to Steve's point, spot on. I feel like it has been almost like gaining my own intern in many ways. It's such a phenomenal assistant to be able to do the tasks that can be kind of put off to something that I know can do it reliably, like crunching certain pieces of data, finding patterns in large pieces of data. In the Sentinel Labs end, we use some custom LLM work to triage open source intelligence to identify patterns of what we should prioritize and look at immediately, as opposed to every tweet under the earth that has an IOC. So things like that, the initial triage, the basic work has been phenomenally reduced in terms of a workload from actual people. So that I love personally. Now going back to like North Korea, yeah, to Steve's point again, it's phenomenal how well North Korea has improved and I would say grown from like a not sophistication but capabilities and creativity and over the years, and over the last year it's been quite explosive. And IT workers in general is like the number one thing we see. I would say it's the most prominent threat that every Western organization sees right now, sees or maybe doesn't know they see in their hiring process. But yeah, being able to lure in recruiters, technical staff on LinkedIn. This all overlaps with their contagious interview side, going after not people trying to get jobs at certain places, but trying to recruit individuals for contracting work and so forth. So yeah, it's a powerhouse for the good and bad sides of our industry for sure, and it's only exploding at this point. It's not slowing down.
And
I'll pass to Chris. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry, I was
yeah.
going to say, Chris, from a manager aspect, can probably speak quite highly to this.
Yeah, so I was just going to add on the DPRK front, like if companies aren't seeing that, it's probably because they're not looking, and they really need to be. I mean, I know what we found, when we started into this was, our HR team was really good at seeing the anomalies, just didn't know it was North Korea. As we dug in and were able to figure out, but if companies aren't looking at that and they're not watching, then they're not tracking it. But I think they should be tracking every single application, whether it's North Korea or some other malicious actor like that, trying to get inside the same way they track a phishing or any type of other security event, right? Like that's an attempt. You need to be watching. You need to see what they're up to. And I think a lot of places aren't doing that.
Yeah, and not to go into the FUD, right? Not to create a lot of uncertainty and doubt, right? But Chris, you're spot on, right? Like it's that old adage that takes us back 2 decades, right? When cybersecurity was still kind of an up and coming trend, if not when, kind of. And especially as we look at organizations, like 10 out of 10, they're already in your network, right? So it's that hypervigilance that I think we have to remain aware as these attacks, right, leverage AI and become more sophisticated to skirt these tools, right, and to become people, right, and become part of our organization. Then, Steve, to bring it back full circle, then AI is malicious, right? And how do we then defend and protect there?
I would say, to pivot on that even further, Mel, I think the big shout out to our friends at the Amazon Intelligence Organization. They have used different tools for North Korea in particular. I think AI is going to be phenomenal for making less capable SOCs and defenders more capable. One in particular that stands out to me is where I think AI is going to be a perfect fit is they were able to identify IT workers in certain organizations that were flagged via the delay in keystrokes from when it occurred to when it actually hit the machines. And that is, I think, one of those ways that AI is going to help because it's such a creative way to identify malicious activity in an organization that it's not a MITRE technique. It's not something you create a signature for usually. Those types of behavioral analytics and so forth, that's where AI is going to really shine to be able to give that capability. So yeah, bad guys are thriving with it, but I feel like it's also been a phenomenal assistant for the good guys too.
Yeah, very well put. Well, the decade that has felt like January 2026 already, right, has not been uninteresting from a news perspective, right? We found ourselves in a period of, kind of transition when we're looking at Venezuela. Tom, and I know you have a lot of thoughts on that, given what you wrote in the blog itself from a prediction standpoint. But now, right, like in the past, 24 to 48 hours, situation in Iran has, obviously become an escalation point. That was an escalation point, right, in mid 2025. Too, as we look at these places from just all over the world that are impacting us from an America standpoint and how we, get involved, how is this going to play a part in, what is the future of cybersecurity and how, not only do we look at the enterprises, right, but we think about how we are getting the right information out there about how we're being included in some of these cyber attacks or kinetic attacks, as we mentioned in the news from yesterday from an Iran's perspective.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's no right answer in terms of like how we should look at all these like geopolitical events unfolding. The biggest thing I would say, the biggest takeaway is to look at this all as an opportunity for our adversaries to take advantage of it in many different ways. For example, the easiest thing we always see when there's some big global event, be it Venezuela, Iran, anything like that, is an adversary using that opportunity to then facilitate or use it as the opportunity to lure targets based on that context. So, for example, seeing organizations that work in the region of Venezuela, you may see phishing emails or phishing lures or anything like that that's using that theme as logic to go after unrelated organizations that may just be concerned about it. It's a stress point, similar to what we saw during COVID, that it gets people, that gets their guard down, and it's an opportunity for an attacker to take advantage of the emotional state of everyone to then get their guard down and get them to click something, get them to load a piece of a document or click a link on an email, and that's a go-to theme we see from crimeware to APTs, and yes, and that's the common thing that you see in global events that are high media impact worthy. There's obviously the PSYOP, the information ops that are all related to all this as well. It steps a bit more away from like your traditional like cyber attacks and so forth. We're just like information ops all over social media, fake news websites being put on by APTs. Influencing global perspective of what's going on is a go-to scheme for a lot of like cyber organizations right now, offensive cyber organizations. And then, I think a good example of what we can expect for Iran is to look back to how they've responded in past tensions with the United States or just Western nations in general. For example, when we saw there was when the last conflict happened with the U.S., there was a huge explosion of hacktivist groups. The global understanding at that point was, hey, there's citizens in Iran that are coming together to try and hack Western organizations and defend themselves. In reality, a lot of this stuff was very similar to what we saw when Russia kicked off the war with Ukraine, where state-sponsored hacktivist groups, it's cloaking itself as a volunteer-run thing, but it's actually a state-run initiative that does opportunistic hacking to try and get media attention. So a lot of what we see across all of these spectrums are really just trying to gain gain attention on the global scale. Is it a news article talking about some water plant being hacked when in reality it was just some publicly exposed interface that was defaced? They all tend to go for attention rather than major impact right now, obviously with a lot of caveats. So yeah, hopefully that answers it. It goes a million different directions, but I think we can definitely chat on that for a while.
Yeah, if I can jump in there too, I think one thing I would say, and I think January is a great example. Like it's been a pretty crazy first half of the first month of what is almost undoubtedly going to be a wild year. But that's almost always the case. It's almost always the case. We're saying that. So what I think is really important, and I'll kind of leverage off what Tom said, is there's this baseline. Like there's just a set amount of malicious activity day in, day out, and there will be ebbs and flows there. And there are expected things like the topical phishing is a great example. So I would almost point this the opposite way. I'll kind of give a counterintuitive intelligence position here. Typically we talk about like understand the threats, understand what they're doing. And I think that's critically important. But most organizations don't have those resources. So the advice I would give to those organizations is do the exact opposite. Get really good at the internal stuff, because then you'll be able to better understand the peaks and the valleys. It'll sound so boring, and I know it's probably the least exciting thing anybody wants to talk about, but the best way, I think, to prepare for intense geopolitical moments is asset management. You need to know what your assets are, where they are, what they do, how your operations use them. If you understand that, you can really start making effective decisions based on the dynamic aspects of the threat landscape versus, I think something that we see a lot of organizations do is it's almost like, oh, there's a bad thing happening in the world. Tell me about it so I need to know if I care. And it's like, well, we can tell you half of that, we cannot tell you the other half. So that's an organizational answer that only organizations can provide.
Yeah, and to that point, I think when I mentioned the previous hacktivist stuff with Iran, it was a lot of the successes in those cases were because people didn't have a good rap on what is the standard of their organization. It was like things that shouldn't have been exposed anyway, accounts that shouldn't have been accessible with leaked credentials and so forth, that they just took advantage of opportunistically. So if you ignored all of like the global events, all the chaos that's happening, those foundational pieces are the only reason they were successful in compromising these organizations. And that didn't require the global events to identify, or that wasn't caused by the global events. It was just low hanging fruit. So yeah, focus internally and get your house in order on a basic level like that will get you a lot farther than trying to keep up with all the chaos.
Yeah, and Chris, what about you? What from your perspective, right? Busy week.
Oh, yeah, this is where I go full like curmudgeon here on that topic, because I think I've been saying like some of those things for like the last 15 years, and frequently on calls where people are worried about like, well, what's the latest O day? What's the latest this? What's the latest that? To the same point, and it's like if you're preparing correctly, it doesn't really matter, right? Like getting that information in a timely fashion is important, is definitely helpful, but if you're prepared, it doesn't necessarily matter, if that just shows up. And I mean, to everybody's point on this, is that's been the same for like as long as I can remember now, and that's kind of that's been my kind of like baseline advice. And I know I've done some others, and people have asked about stuff and expecting some shiny what's the latest answer, and I'm like, until you're doing like some of these basic things, it like you can do the other things, right? They'll still have some payoff, but if you're not doing some of these basics, then that payoff's limited and not really gonna get you where you want to go.
Yeah, it's like back to Steve's point, like basic things that are just help with that preparedness, right, from a response perspective, as these threat actors, right, and nation states become more agile to traverse our networks and our critical infrastructure. And so going back to like again the prediction and maybe the hype there to some of those TTPs that these threat actors continue to use, or use cases, right? Like thoughts on ransomware. We look back in hindsight, we had some pretty phenomenal ransomware attacks on a critical infrastructure from a U.S. perspective. Colonial Pipeline, naming one. Shout out to our friends at Mandiant for the work there in 2022. But how do you see ransomware being a place where those threat actors and/or AI is incorporated from an activity this year?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there first. Ransomware has a special place in our heart for sure. And yeah, shout out to those major incidents and those teams that have responded to them. Ransomware has been, I think, like the most annoying pain point in our industry for a long time. I do think we, however, are close to kind of like a major shift, or close to, or / like already in the middle of a shift where ransomware, is like in a traditional sense, is kind of disappearing. It's purely going into extortion. It's not about the super loud malware that gets in a network and EDR platforms are all catching and it's encrypting drives. It's very noisy, shuts down organizations. Nowadays, it's shifting more towards, and I think over the next prediction is more of this, is extortion only. Get in there, steal whatever you can, and extort it for money. It's a lot easier. It is likely a lot more successful because you have a less chance of getting stopped. And there's reduced risk on the actors for attribution, getting caught and detected, et cetera, even after the fact, after it's all run by law enforcement. So yeah, extorting organizations for the data that you steal. And this is going to explode even more because of the reliance on data that sits outside of the organization that you can control. And AI, perfect example of that. How many of your employees are putting company data into an LLM that can have data stolen, that's completely outside of your capability to defend within your organization. These cloud LLMs that are in taking all of your internal data, all your employee behavioral activity, all your customer information. That's a huge risk. And I think that's going to be sought after for this extortion even more. So yeah, shifting away, in my opinion, from malware, ransomware to getting in there, smash and grab to steal what you can to extort it in a traditional ransom style event.
Yeah, and I think, if we kind of bridge from the past into the point of this, the predictions, I think, I'll kind of plus one what Tom's saying and add a couple things on there. I think if we look at ransomware from the past few years and what I think is going to come up the next few years, I think there's going to be three fairly substantive differences. The first one's exactly what Tom said. There's not even a prediction on it. We're seeing more extortion versus encryption. We're, effectively almost 10 years into large-scale ransomware now, and we've watched this slow, steady progression from encryption only to encryption and extortion, now to more extortion versus encryption. And I think that's a pretty obvious progression. Defenders have got better in those 10 years. The ability to restore from backups is much more common. Organizations have muscle memory now on doing recovery. So while we have not solved all of the encryption problems, there are real opportunities to do that. But to Tom's earlier point, if the data is stolen, what are you going to do now? That's an entirely different. There's not a technology you can field to steal your data back. There's not a technology you can field to make sure attackers can't do something bad with highly sensitive data they stole. So I'm fairly confident the attackers have realized that. So I think we will see this emerging shift around data theft and extortion become the primary go-to motion, number one. Number two, if we go back to the AI topic, I don't want to make it all about AI, but you can't talk ransomware without AI as well. I think what we would expect that to be is going to be a complete 180. Ransomware, really over the last 5 years especially, has been about broad targeting. The large ransomware intrusions of the last couple of years have been ransomware groups bought an O-Day and then just went after every organization that was vulnerable for that. AI is not needed to find a bunch of vulnerabilities. That has been there from time immemorial. AI is incredibly good at finding a highly specific vulnerability at a highly specific organization. That, I think, is where we're going to see ransomware use AI, as well as finding the right organizations. AI is really good at reconnaissance. AI is really good at understanding things that you may not know. So we should realistically expect to see those ransomware groups become much more skilled almost overnight at the pre-intrusion steps, the ability to choose victims, the ability to set up ahead of time how they're going to go after those victims and why. And then I think if we go to the third part of it, one of the things that we at SentinelOne have been a huge fan of is the multiple international governments going after cyber criminal groups. That whole of government power really is important. And what we're seeing is that go after the really big groups, the groups that tend to dominate the landscape. And what has not happened is that dismantling those very large groups means ransomware has stopped. What has happened is we're just now seeing smaller and smaller groups, and now it's just a more open market. So I think if we would look at 2024 versus 2026, we should expect to see a lot more ransomware groups as we do our retrospective a year from now. So I think those will be the three shifts that we'll see over the coming year or two.
Well, in Tom, you said it, ransomware can be super lucrative for these threat actors, right? They're financially motivated by this. And with that, right, the ability for them to, leverage other currencies, right? From a crypto and things like that. Chris, what are some of those, kind of more AI crypto focused attacks that keep you up at night, and kind of answer to everybody here? And would love to hear feedback from the audience in the Q&A. Those are real-time things that we're still learning to navigate and defend against.
Yeah, I'm not sure specifically on the crypto. Maybe Tom, if you've got something there, but I mean, I think to kind of Tom's point where he was going, I mean, and Steve said also that like we're going to have more groups, and those groups are going to be taking advantage of the areas that the companies aren't good in. So I mean, using AI, I mean, you can go do a lot of profiling on a company, on where they're doing hiring, what tools they use, what technologies they use, who they're outsourcing to. If I've got a target, then I go figure out, you know, what are they not good at doing in-house? What are they desperately hiring for, right? What have they outsourced? What is that company, you know, what if their outsourcer outsourced to some other provider? And I think we saw a lot of it this year with some of the like the comm, where they would just hit like big data providers and take everything, which got them every company using, you know, that data provider. If we think of like Snowflake and some of the other, you know, other attacks, that's only going to you know, AI just makes that so much easier on their part. They don't have to be good at figuring that out. They can let AI do that for them.
Yeah. So from my perspective, completely agree with you, Chris. On the crypto end, I think there's such like a broad scope of options here. So I think one, you're going to see the attackers that seek like crypto theft in bulk, like you see out of our North Korean friends. They're going to do similar to what the IT workers are doing. They're going to improve their lures, their online personas. They're going to use deep fake videos and photos to interview, to try and make it very apparent that they are real and so forth. Besides all of that, I think the really interesting stuff that I'm kind of expecting to see this year on the crypto end is going to be more on the fraud side, in addition to almost into like the prediction markets end of the warehouse. So fraud speaking, you know, we see a lot of high ranking, highly publicly visible individuals creating their own cryptocurrencies. We're very likely going to see multiple cases of somebody's online persona that's a very high profile individual getting hijacked to then pitch a cryptocurrency, and then it's going to be a pump and dump scheme, and someone's going to make a lot of money. It's going to either be somebody that hacks this individual, or this individual claiming they got hacked. But cryptocurrency and hacking is all going to be a very tough topic in this arena. But on the prediction markets end, it's very similar. I think you're going to see automated. You can do this with AI. You can do it by hacking individuals to manipulate the market. But creating large bet predictions in Polymarket or whatever your platform is of choice for major events happening, and creating online bets and then making it happen by hacking, disrupting. When you know something, if you can turn off the power to a certain organization and you place bets on it, you can make a lot of money. So I think it's all going to play into this giant fraud scheme around crypto, and it's just kind of amplifying the capability with the AI, of course.
And Steve, question for you. I'm going to jump into the Q&A real quick. Thanks, Ross, for your question. How do you see CISOs best leveraging AI in 2026? Is it primarily through offerings from partners such as SentinelOne? Knowledge or skills would you see are differentiators for CISOs in the next year ahead?
Yeah, great question. I honestly get asked this question every single day. I answered this exact question at least twice yesterday in two different audiences. So I would kind of say three things. First is, we struggle to say here's what a CISO should do, because there's just so much variety in CISOs and their organizations. So it's always going to be a little bit of a tough sell there to get that center spot. But what I would say is, if we try to think about the most CISOs, I think there's really two things they should focus on. First, if they're going to start using AI, I really think it's important that they find a partner to work with them on that AI journey. And what I mean by that specifically is, every organization is going to have different risk tolerances. Every organization has different requirements and priorities. And AI is an expensive technology. There's no way around it. AI experts are expensive experts. So organizations should really probably not expect to be able to go through the entire gamut and the entire spectrum where they need to discover and learn and refine. all by themselves. I just think for 99% of the organizations, that's not going to work. So I think that first part of the solution for CISOs is find a partner that's willing to really spend time on where you are, listen to where you want to go on the journey, and then help you through that. That might be a baby step. That might be jumping to the bleeding edge. It might actually not be that at all. It might be, we're actually not ready for AI yet. Let's give this thing a year, whatever that case may be. Third part of this is what I think CISOs really need to think about the second they start getting into AI. That's a brand new security surface for any organization. And it is a complicated, challenging security surface to defend against, because there's really functionally three major areas that have to be secured. First is data. It's just hard to overstate how important large piles of data are for AI tools to be successful. I kind of have bad news for everybody. As a cybersecurity industry, we're still not really great at securing data. We still struggle in most organizations to understand how much data there is, where it is, what is inside of that data, how much data grows every day. We pay the cloud bills, we see the growth, but we don't really understand how that's happening in many cases. So that alone is one. You've got to secure now an entirely new large data set on top of the original data set. The second part is the models themselves. Securing AI as a technology is also really challenging because it's an emerging technology. Emerging technologies tend to be more vulnerable because there's not years of improvement and experience and stress testing. And that's not unique to AI. That's just emerging technologies. And then the third part is, how are your users using it, and how are malicious actors acting as your users? Because, and I'll go all the way back to the very beginning of something that both Tom and Chris hit on. If we really look at how attackers are using AI, attackers do not want to pay for their own AI. It's expensive. They don't want to host their own AI. What they want to do is compromise organizations, become valid AI users, and then leverage a victim's AI architecture and user accounts to do what they want to do. So you've now got to understand what your users are doing. What kind of questions are they asking via prompts? Is it the actual thing that you expect? How is the data traversing in those interactions? So securing AI, organizations really have to think through that before they start operationalizing AI, because it is not an easy task.
Great question, great answer. And I'm going to say, Steve, as our newly appointed Chief Customer Officer, I'm looking at a white paper for you on that in the near future to expand on that. I'm going to come back to the Q&A here shortly, but kind of want to round out the AI thread as, you know, kind of it'll be continuous and synonymous for what we talk about in 2026. But as we look at, you know, AI-powered security and features and tools and technology out there, bold prediction on what are some of those AI-powered products that might be shelfware at the end of this year?
Ooh, spicy.
Yeah, so I'll take first swing at that. I'm not sure about what we'll see for shelfware per se. I think we're going to see two things, along with what we're already seeing with AI. So let's just put that one aside. That would be an unfair prediction to just say what already is happening. But I think if we look what I think will be different, where the deltas will emerge, I think there will be two. One, a number of organizations are going to kind of find out the hard way that they weren't quite ready for AI applications as they intended. And that will kind of slide to the background, and that is ripe for compromise. That is, I mean, you get into shadow IT very quickly, you get into a number of other things. So I think that will become high value real estate for attackers and for defenders. And a number of defenders are going to kind of move it to the side, and that's going to be a big blind spot. So I think that's going to be part one. And that may be shelfware per se. I think it'll be much more about organization compared to organization. The second thing, and we definitely, this was one of the things we highlighted in the Sentinel Labs look at our predictions. If you always try to look for what's the thing that's going to surprise you. And more often than not, when we do these retrospectives, North Korea surprises us. Nobody had North Korea compromising a Hollywood studio to prevent a movie release on their threat card before that happened. Nobody had North Korea employing thousands of actual North Koreans to be valid employees to gather paychecks. Nobody had that prediction, not one person. Nobody predicted years ago that North Korea would run essentially all of the top 10, 20, 30 crypto thefts of all time. Again, North Korea continues to surprise us. North Korea is also really proving two things. One, they know how to use AI and they demand that use across its own apparatus. And second, they clearly are reinvesting illicit gains, whether that's through IT workers or through crypto theft, right back into the apparatus that can keep doing that, which now we're back to AI and intrusions. So if we jam those two things together, I think if we look for like that black swan, to use that term, which I don't really like, but that you always have struggled to predict the thing that's going to surprise us. I think North Korea is going to surprise us with AI based on they surprise us day in and day out. They definitely use AI and they are reinvesting illicit gains back into technologies that provide those illicit gains. Those three things together almost guarantee something out of nowhere that's going to really put us back on our heels when it comes to bad guys using AI.
Tom, real quick, you said spicy. I might say something controversial here, right? But AI is not controversial anymore. It's something that consumers are using, right? That our families are using, our kids are using. But something that has come up more relevant, I would say, in independent journalism and other places is surveillance tools, right? Any thoughts and opinions there? Is that going to be something that we see increase? Is that going to be more widely adopted? And that kind of dovetails in lots of things too, from a geopolitical standpoint. So, Tom, give me your spiciest answer there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like all good and bad guys, it's seen as an opportunity to improve the capabilities of certain tools. And that unfortunately includes surveillance on a global perspective, domestically, wherever you are. There are certain threat actors out there that are creating products that are used for surveillance, and they're absolutely integrating this stuff already. Your go-to security system in the United States right now, you can enable AI and start tracking license plates. So it's everywhere. It's becoming norm. It's not like this is the sudden shift over the last year, or it's going to be a prediction, but it's like a big slow transition over the last year plus into now where AI is native in all capabilities for surveillance, offensive operations, tracking individuals, tracking social media, online personas. So yeah, I think high risk organizations, high risk users, depending on where they operate. We support a lot of like NGOs that tend to be targeted on global scales by foreign governments. And yeah, it's being used to figure out what they're doing, to find opportunities to take advantage of certain scenarios to accomplish their mission, either disrupt an individual from saying things, arrest individuals, and so forth. So yeah, long story short, being very vague on all this, it's a tool that is increasing the capabilities on all fronts. And to kind of to Steve's point as well, is this is becoming almost like a how bad can it get scenario. Everyone's very creative in how they're using AI, and it's just a matter of time until we start to see, kind of going into the ransomware side again, like the process of using something super easy to get into a network, automate the whole thing to get the data exfilled, where some script kiddie no longer has to write a script to do something that's does a DDoS. The entry level now is being able to create a phishing lure and exfil personal data and hack someone's social media account, all automated, that some kid could script up with an LLM. So it's making everyone more capable, from surveillance to script kiddies.
Yeah. Well,
but if you think about all of those surveillance capabilities improving, that's more data sitting around unprotected, more data ripe for the picking for ransomware, extortion operations. And I don't know. And until we get stricter laws, more punishment for companies that are leaving those kinds of things unprotected, instead of just going, sorry about that, we're going to up our cyber insurance, after this event. I don't know that any of that's really going to change, or we outlaw cryptocurrencies, like
What, yeah,
or both.
to that point, Chris, to that point, one unfortunate prediction is everyone's kind of becoming numb to how much of their own data is available on the internet and like what a data leak and your personal information being stolen. Everyone's kind of numb to that. I mean, I get like 3 of those letters a week, I feel like, at this point, saying my information's been stolen by somebody. So yeah, it's a very unfortunate thing that's coming. And the prediction is we lose value in our own personal private data and online presence and so forth. That's no longer private. It's kind of freely available out there.
Yeah. Well, as being a Melissa Smith, I did my identity being stolen because there's only 7,827 of us out there. But approximately, right? Just quickly want to thank you guys, to you and your teams, for the research and the education and everything you put into writing these prediction reports and analysis. I know that takes a lot of work, right? And not everything is super interesting, as we said, but it's information and it's education we need to put out there, right, and provide back. So thanks, Tom and Chris and Steve, to you and your teams for being part of this, and look forward to what came true and what maybe is more of a 2027 prediction. But I want to thank our audience for the questions here. And I want to jump in here before we run out of time. Cassie, thanks for your question. Team, going back to the ransomware use case, she asks, is S1 preparing for this change in threat landscape from ransomware to an extortion? And if they are, what does that look like?
Yeah, I can jump on that one. I think what you'll see, and again, I'll go back to kind of a fundamental answer I gave earlier. This is not going to be some like, gee whiz, wow, here's this new thing that we're launching and selling. That's not how we're going after this. As we look at that shift, also at the same time, we are watching this like constant push on malicious use of AI. You'll see, as we are focusing on what we're going to do with our technology in the coming year, a real focus around identity and a real focus around data, to include data that is coming from and interacting with AI, which is a big part of why we did the Prompt acquisition. But when we look at, like, we do identity now, we do data pieces now, but you'll see us really try to improve those capabilities, because when we look at the extortion use case, what it comes down to is there's always illicit valid access, always, and always are dangerous in intelligence discussions, but it's 100% true. If you show me an extortion event, I will show you some form of illicit valid access. So really focusing on that identity piece is going to be critically important to solve both that and the rapidly emerging AI threats, and the same things around data independent of where it lives. That just has to be a focus. We are well past the days where the obstacles between on-prem, cloud, hybrid, different applications, that has no meaningful difference whatsoever. So you will see SentinelOne also focus on how we can provide the right outcome across that data ecosystem, wherever it may be.
Great. Derek, love your question here. Derek asks, seeing as how my SMB services the home user community, where does cybersecurity fit in with the home user when it comes to AI? Love that.
Yeah, great question. I think the jury's still out on that one. What we're going to hopefully see are more freely available tools that assist home users for security. And I think the best place that we're going to likely see something first would be the edge network devices. Almost every home router out there is vulnerable. They're all serving as major threats for APTs to kick off operations against actual enterprise organizations. It's a national security issue, if you ask me. So I expect us to hopefully, or I expect us to see AI assist in defending these devices that we have to openly accept are going to remain vulnerable forever and sit there forever on the internet. But yeah, otherwise, it's an actual AI use for home users. Everyone's mom and dad and kids all using ChatGPT to do everything personal and giving it way too much personal information. There's unfortunately no good answer to that yet. I think the way forward right now, at least until these platforms start to create like parental control capabilities and are more tightly restricted on what they can communicate with depending on the user type, education is key. Teaching your average home and SMB user on the weaknesses of giving all this stuff to your LLMs, the threat that presents itself when all this data is sitting on some cloud provider. It's a lot more open, and it's going to become even more apparent when these platforms start to integrate more direct sales into the LLM. Everyone's going to be getting sales pitches for things that are very private to them that they're right now putting freely into LLM engines on the home user and small businesses. So not a good answer, I know right now, but I think this will be the year where we start to see some direct like impact towards how average people can use this, not just enterprise organizations.
Yeah, thank you. And Mark, we see your question. I'm going to go ahead and ask Molly if we can follow up with you offline on that, because I think it has some detailed thought we want to make sure that we get across for you. And looking at the time here in respect of our audience, to get everybody to their next meeting, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And the most important question I have to ask is, Steve, will your Bears be victorious this weekend?
Hey, listen, everybody keeps hating on the Bears. They just keep winning close games. So I'm going to predict Bears win despite being down by 28 points going into the fourth quarter. Bold prediction.
I love that bold prediction. Well, may we all be Bears fans this weekend, and may the best team win. And thank you, everybody. Stay vigilant out there. Look for more from us in 2026. And as always, if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you, team, for joining me today. Take care, everybody.
Thanks all.
Take care.
Yeah, thanks.